Artificial intelligence is one of the most important innovations of the last few years on a global scale, and this also applies to several areas of basketball. There are countless aspects of the game where this technology is positively changing working processes and improving the quality of outcomes, but the one that personally fascinates me the most is player selection at the draft. It is one of the most important steps in building both the present and the future of an NBA franchise. A good draft pick can have a potential impact across every area that matters for a team, from the sporting side, through improved results on the court, to the financial side, through increased ticket sales at the arena, higher merchandise revenue, and greater interest from sponsors willing to invest in the team. If in the past talent selection was largely a subjective process entrusted to the judgment of a small group of individuals, today it has become far more analytical, supported by completely different tools. This is also why, in recent years, mock drafts have become increasingly homogeneous and much closer to the actual draft results. The goal of this video is therefore to dive deep into how NBA teams evaluate talent, describing and explaining in detail how a team ultimately arrives at selecting a specific player at the draft in 2026. All of this and more after the intro. The first aspect to examine is whether, and in what ways, NBA teams use technology and artificial intelligence in particular in their decision-making processes, more specifically when it comes to selecting a prospect at the draft. This topic was addressed by Daryl Morey during his appearance on the podcast Pablo Torre Finds Out, on the occasion of the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference.
We've used a version of AI for a long time. We mentioned this on an earlier panel. The AI is just forecasting. My job is making good decisions. It's all about forecasting. We've used machine learning models for forecasting for a long time. And primarily, the big areas that would be most relevant would be things like forecasting draft picks. There are a whole bunch of different forecasting techniques, traditional regression, linear regression, tree models, graphical models. There's like a whole set that have been tried. And they're all like a flavor of forecasting, of which even goes into large language models later.
When you're making a decision, and insert your favorite Sixers decision here, are you asking an LLM for their input?
So two answers there. We absolutely use models as a vote in any decision, and how much of that decision depends on, how much the assumptions behind those models don't change, and their past success rate. So if you have a highly successful model for picking draft picks, and we think that the game, Evan hasn't changed the rules yet, and so the game isn't changed.
Evan Wash, who's in charge of the league office,
thank you,
of defeating you.
Yes. Then the models get a lot of weight in those decisions. It turns out LLMs do fairly well at prediction. They still are not beating human, like super forecasters they're called, like in Human Judgment Project talks about it. But they do add signal over just scouts and things like that. So we'll treat them almost like one scout. Now over time, if it's shown that they have a better track record than scouts, we might weight the LLMs or use multiple LLMs as one or two votes out of the process.
To understand what Daryl Morey means, it is necessary to briefly introduce LLMs, or large language models. Without going too deep into the technical details, so as not to make the video overly complicated or heavy, they can be described as sophisticated autocomplete systems trained on a massive amount of textual data. The key point, however, is understanding how they work. The model does not actually read words, but instead breaks the input text into tokens, which are the fundamental units used to process language. Tokenization is essential because LLMs cannot read text directly. They process numbers. So raw text must first be converted into another format, namely tokens. Each token is then transformed into an embedding, meaning a numerical vector within a multidimensional space where similar meanings, such as dog and puppy, are located close to one another. The aspect that interests us the most, though, is that during the output generation process, at every step, an LLM simply calculates the statistical probability of the next piece of text. In other words, these models do not truly reason in the strict sense. They mainly predict text based on the data they were trained on. To make things clearer, and I want to stress the fact that I've never received a single dollar from any company to make this video or mention their products. Some examples of LLMs include ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and Grok. These are tools that we ourselves use frequently, although probably with less powerful versions than those accessible to NBA teams or, more generally, very wealthy individuals, and they are extremely useful for tasks such as text production, translation, coding, and so on. What I personally do not believe falls within the competence of LLMs, however, is providing an opinion on draft prospect selection. This is not due to any aversion toward this technology, one that I personally use and study extensively every single day, but rather because of a few fundamental reasons. First of all, I have already mentioned how these technologies are fundamentally systems for predicting text. The output produced by them is therefore not the result of a reasoning process comparable to that of the human brain. Secondly, LLMs suffer from what are commonly referred to as hallucinations. In the context of language models, a hallucination is a response that is syntactically or semantically plausible, but not faithful to external reality or to the context provided in the prompt. It's important to understand that an LLM does not lie with the intention of deceiving. It is simply following its statistical nature, calculating the most probable next token. If the probability leads it down an incorrect path, it will follow it with the same confidence it would show when producing a correct answer. Hallucinations are not, at least for now, a rare phenomenon. This can be seen in the chart related to the AI Omniscience Hallucination Rate benchmark published on artificialanalysis.ai. This benchmark measures how often a model answers incorrectly when it should have refused the question or admitted that it did not know the answer. Even the model that currently performs best in this regard, which is Claude 4.5 Haiku, still records a hallucination rate of around 26%, which is far from a negligible figure. There is also an important distinction to make. LLMs currently available on the market, even the most advanced ones, treat the RAG component, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation, the mechanism responsible for reading and interpreting instructions and data, as only a small part of their overall architecture. As a result, they are not particularly strong when it comes to analyzing and interpreting data, especially considering that every aspect used to evaluate a prospect is ultimately translated into data, something we will see very clearly later on. A fully RAG-based system, such as NotebookLM, which differs from traditional LLMs, could already be much more useful and effective for data classification and analysis, and it would tend to produce a hallucination rate close to zero. However, Daryl Morey specifically refers to LLMs. When you ask an LLM for an opinion, as Morey and the Philadelphia 76ers reportedly do, the response you receive is essentially a synthesis of the opinions available on the web and the data the model was trained on by the company that developed it. By contrast, when you ask a RAG-based system, the output is generated exclusively from the sources uploaded by the user. Finally, It is also worth mentioning that LLMs struggle significantly with hard constraints and negative instructions. They can be influenced by the narrative surrounding a player to the point of reshaping the positive or negative factors associated with that player, simply to maintain internal coherence in the response. Moreover, these language models are not capable of properly understanding the relative weight of the different components that make up a player's profile. In short, LLMs can be extremely useful for many tasks, but they are not particularly reliable when dealing with certain types of analytical or mathematical problems, such as selecting a player at the NBA draft. One thing we can all agree on is that translating the information scouts evaluate ahead of the draft into data is absolutely essential, both to help models better understand the inputs and to allow the people working with this information to interpret and classify it more effectively. Everyone knows how a made basket can be translated into a numerical statistic, but what I want to do today is show you how NBA scouting departments convert some seemingly hard-to-quantify aspects of the game into numerical inputs, and which types of data they combine in order to produce the most accurate and reliable evaluations possible. There are mainly two academic papers I analyzed in order to understand how players are evaluated ahead of the draft. The first focuses on the psychological component of prospects, while the second examines the technical component. In the first case, the research relied on a software tool called linguistic inquiry and word count, through which psychological profiles of players were extracted by analyzing the frequency of different categories of words utilized while speaking, using algorithms, which I will mention for completeness and to allow you to conduct your own research if you are interested, but which I will not explain in detail so as not to make the video overly heavy, such as light GBM and survival analysis, the latter built using the Kaplan-Meier estimator and the Cox proportional hazards model. Setting the technical aspects aside, the psychological traits measured through the player's verbal expression were authenticity. That is, being honest and non-defensive, temporal focus, whether oriented toward the past, present, or future, the expression of positive emotions, and linguistic complexity. The results showed that frequently maintaining a focus on the present and the future is a strong indicator of success, and that players who present themselves as honest and non-defensive in interviews tend to have higher probabilities of succeeding. The study also found that the use of less complex language may indicate a more immediate style of thinking, something that can be beneficial for the quick decision-making required on the court. Finally, the use of absolute terms such as never or absolutely was found to have a nonlinear correlation with outcomes, meaning that very high usage levels may signal negative tendencies and predict worse performance. In statistical terms, the results showed the following. A model based solely on on-court performance has a 78.3% accuracy in predicting whether a player will make it to the NBA. If we add psychological data, that figure increases by 4.7%, reaching 83%. Finally, by incorporating additional contextual factors, such as age, height, weight, and conference, the model reaches 86.7% accuracy, resulting in a decisively reliable predictive model. As for the ability to predict how many games a player will actually play, the so-called survival analysis, the result was expressed through the concordance index. In this metric, 0.5 represents random chance, while values above it indicate a proportionally stronger positive impact of the considered factors as the result approaches 1. A model based solely on NCAA statistics has a C-index of 0.704. If psychological data are added, the value rises to 0.738. And if physical parameters and draft status are included as well, the model reaches 0.842, a figure that is certainly significant from a statistical standpoint. So yes, the psychological data are measurable and useful in the prospects evaluation. NBA teams noticed that, and Sean Farrell, one of the author of the paper, even said he was contacted by Heat, Lakers, Suns, and Cavaliers. There is also a second paper, which highlights how the success of players transitioning from college to the NBA can be predicted through the analysis of massive volumes of tracking data, generated by applying advanced computer vision techniques to broadcast video of games. Computer vision makes it possible to see the game by extracting raw positional data of players and the ball directly from TV footage. To extract these data, X and Y coordinates are assigned to both players and the ball for every frame of the video. The raw data are then merged with play-by-play logs and optical character recognition data to identify the score and game clock. This process allows the game to be segmented into possessions and enables the automatic detection of events such as ball screens, drives, isolations, post-ups, and off-ball screens. To interpret these data, several supervised learning algorithms are used. I will mention them here as well for completeness, without going into detailed explanations, namely the actor-action attention neural network, the multi-layer perceptron, light GBM, and random forest. As for evaluating the player, what is assigned is a so-called influence score, a metric that accounts for both defensive and offensive impact. To calculate defensive influence, a score from 0 to 100 is assigned to each frame of the game using a multi-layer perceptron algorithm trained on thousands of examples labeled by basketball experts. The resulting metric therefore captures the influence a defender exerts on every offensive player at any given moment. Offensive influence works in a similar way, except that instead of considering defensive metrics, it considers offensive ones. The model based on tracking data showed a log loss, which is an error metric. The lower it is, the more accurate the model's predicted probabilities are, of 0.30 compared to 0.40 for the model based solely on traditional box score statistics, therefore proving to be more reliable than box score stats alone. Finally, in order to make accurate predictions about a player's professional career despite small sample sizes, especially in the case of one-and-done players, researchers rely on two methods. The first is padding, that is, regression toward the mean, which combines the observed statistics with a sample average to reduce the random fluctuations typical of small samples. The second is ensemble, that is, an ensemble of models, since it is more accurate to build two separate models, one based on raw data and one on padded data, and then combine their results, rather than relying on a single model. In addition, advanced machine learning models like the ones used here are often considered black boxes, meaning it is difficult to understand why they produced a certain result. To address this issue, researchers use Shapley values, a concept derived from game theory. For each individual prediction, Shapley values indicate both the direction, positive or negative, and the magnitude of the influence that each specific player characteristic has relative to the other features of that player. For example, if we are analyzing a very tall and physical big man who shows high rim gravity despite a small sample size, the Shapley values will likely indicate that this statistic is reliable, since it reflects a characteristic that is plausibly consistent given the player's physical profile. It is thanks to these technologies, alongside the work of the scouting department, that the Charlotte Hornets drafted Con Knippel, as also confirmed by Charlotte's vice president of basketball insights himself. Similarly, the Toronto Raptors have relied for several years on technology and data provided by IBM Watson to guide their draft selections, achieving excellent results. and like them, many other NBA teams are doing the same. Today's video was a little different from the usual content, but in my opinion, very interesting and informative. Let me know what you think in the comments. Feel free as well to support the channel in any way you'd like. Then, if you're looking for extra basketball content, you'll find some useful links in the description to my other pages. Thank you very much for the incredible support, and I'll see you in the next video.